Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. And yes, I'm back. I'm so happy to be filming for you guys once again. And today is a good one because I just watched Atlanta season 3. Let's talk about it. So Atlanta is back, guys. Yes, after a 3-year hiatus, I believe it was, perhaps even 4 years, Atlanta has finally returned to our screens, and I just couldn't be happier. I think this is one of the best shows on television at the moment, and so I was very much looking forward to seeing what they would do for season 3 of this show. Now, even though I was really excited to watch season 3 of Atlanta, I was dreading having to review it because it's such a unique series. It's kind of like a hybrid between a regular old serial show and also an anthology. So with each of these episodes, you could really dive into them in their own independent videos. And I wish I could have, as the season was dropping every week. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to review it on a weekly basis. And so I'm going to have to try and cram in my thoughts on these 10 very different episodes in one video. So whilst I already know that this is going to be long as hell, I still don't think that one video will be enough to truly express my thoughts and feelings on each episode of season 3 of Atlanta, but I'm going to give it a good go, okay? I'm going to try my best to share with you guys my thoughts on this latest season, and I would of course love to hear what you guys think of this season down in the comments below. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next, okay? I don't often allow so much time between uploads, but recently I did take a little bit of a break just to kind of clear my mind and get more inspired and motivated to bring you guys some new videos. So I've enjoyed that break and now I'm back slowly but surely trying to get back into the rhythm of things. And also, if you haven't already, be sure to follow me on Twitter. I do also usually tweet my thoughts and feelings about other TV shows that I don't get a chance to review on this channel. So if you're curious to hear my thoughts on that, go ahead and follow me on Twitter as well. Without further ado, it's been a while since I've reviewed anything. It's been about 2 weeks since I've filmed, so I'm always a bit shaky after a break, but let's see if I can get through my thoughts on Atlanta season 3. So first of all, as I alluded to before, when it comes to season 3 of Atlanta, it did feel more like an anthology series this time around. And you know, Stephanie Robinson, in an interview in IndieWire, I believe, she referred to these kind of standout episodes that have nothing to do with the main storyline as bottle episodes. And I feel like this season, more than any other previously, has had a ton more bottle episodes for us to explore these other kind of wider themes that Atlanta likes to touch on. But this time around, I think they use the bottle episodes to explore these themes from completely different perspectives, and most notably from the perspective of white people. Because yes, we certainly had the return of this intelligent and really thought-provoking social commentary, you know, the exploration of themes like racism, but not just racism in America this time around, but globally, and in particular in Europe. And not only did we get to see racism be explored in different countries, but also different classes and in regards to different industries and cultures and, you know, historical traditions as well. So I feel like this season set itself up to really explore these themes from all different perspectives. And so I feel like this season around, the show doesn't allow itself to be restricted by the fact that the, you know, 4 main characters are 4 Black American people. And speaking of introducing different perspectives in season 3 of Atlanta, this season happens to be the season where Stephen Glover contributed the least when it came to the writing. In previous seasons, we have seen him contribute at least like half of the episodes in a season as a writer, but this time around he only wrote 1 of the episodes, and a lot of the other episodes have different writers, again adding to that feel of an anthology series. And I think this kind of has pros and cons. I think a pro is, of course, that you're able to tell stories from different perspectives, and you know, people are able to create something unique within the landscape of this show. And And I think some people really thrived in that and created some incredible, memorable episodes of Atlanta this season. But on the flip side of things, I do think that this season sometimes lost that kind of core vision, that kind of core feel, especially when you have the four main characters that were largely absent this time around. We'll talk about that later on when we go through my thoughts on the characters and their arcs this season. But yeah, I do think that there is a kind of divergence from what we saw in like season 1 in particular, when those four main characters really were the center of the show, and now it seems like it's kind of broadened out for better or for worse. And next up, I did also want to touch on the fact that, as I mentioned before, this season went global, okay? Atlanta went global, and I love this. I love this. I like the fact that, you know, season 3 of Atlanta doesn't even take place in Atlanta itself, but instead you see Paperboy going on this European tour, jumping from cities to cities like Copenhagen, Amsterdam, London, Budapest, you know, all of these different cities that he goes to as a part of this tour, and we get to see European audiences' reaction to Paperboy, you know, the fandom around Paperboy in Europe, as well as of course seeing Paperboy or Alfred living this kind of big celebrity rapper lifestyle abroad as well, and also seeing Earn, you know, the way that Earn has developed in these past few years and his role as a Paperboy's manager and how that has developed. They really make use of this premise. You know, the European cities aren't just backdrops, they really play an important role in the storytelling here, and I think that was just superb. I think it was really, really refreshing, especially when you take into account the themes that this series has always explored, like that of racism. Oftentimes when you see American media, there seems to be this misconception that racism isn't as much of a big deal in Europe. Racism is like, oh, it's bad, but it's not as bad. No. It's bad everywhere, okay? And so when you get to see shows like Atlanta representing these kind of racist traditions and, you know, problematic cultures that you see in Europe, I think it's really important because it sheds a light on the plight of, you know, Black people and POC across the pond as well. At the same time, it's not all doom and gloom, you know, and that's what makes Atlanta so special, is that it's able to have this incredibly clever social commentary whilst also being hilarious, whilst also being so funny, but also surrealist and also incredibly experimental, especially when it came to season 3. So that's what I really love about the show, is that yes, you do have that commentary there, and yes, it does explore, you know, aspects of European culture that are questionable, okay, but at the same time you have these like 4 incredible characters at the center of this story, and also the new characters that they introduce are also really, really compelling, and it's just so well written all around that it's entertaining on so many different levels. I will say though, if I had a tiny critique when it came to the fact that this series was based in Europe this time around, it would be that I wish they had made some sort of route for Alfred's tour, you know, for us to follow the different countries that they were in, because it did seem like they were going back and forth a little bit. Like there were episodes where they would be in the Netherlands, in Copenhagen, they would go to Amsterdam, and then there'd be another episode where they're in London, and then they're back in Amsterdam. So I wish it had been a little bit more linear that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't make the series, you know, fall apart or anything, but I just think, you know, as someone who was following along with the countries that they were in, it would have made more sense if we had just seen them travel from country to country as opposed to going back and forth. And also, whilst we're on the topic of certain, you know, themes and aspects of season 3 that I wasn't the biggest fan of, I would say whilst I really like the anthological approach that season 3 takes with the show, and I really like exploring these different kind of, like Stephanie Robinson said, these bottle episodes, I do think that unfortunately the four main characters that we absolutely love did pay a price for that. We definitely saw less of them this time around, and I think it's a bit of a shame. They're such incredible characters, they're so compelling, and I wish there had been a little bit more emphasis on them, even if this show did want to diverge and go into, you know, different pocket dimensions within the Atlanta universe. Okay, so speaking of our main 4 characters, I'm going to be going through my thoughts on their character arcs for season 3 of the show, starting off with number 1, the king himself, Donald Glover's Earn. Yes, let's talk about this season, because Ern's transformation was actually what struck me the most about the character this season. And it wasn't something that was shouted from the rooftops. It was something that was shown and not said. And I think that's really, really important. That's great storytelling on Atlanta's part, because we're able to see Ern's transformation without anyone declaring him as being transformed. We see how efficient he's become, how great at his job he's become. He's just getting stuff done. And he's able to anticipate Paperboy's needs before he even has to say anything. That's one thing that I believe it's episode 2 establishes really, really well when they're in Copenhagen/Amsterdam, is that he's just running around doing all of these errands, and you see the frustration, you see how he's over it sometimes, but at the same time he's become so good at his job that you see how that experience has really benefited him. He's leveled up. Like, Ern has absolutely leveled up. And like I said, there is no major storyline about how Ern has suddenly changed. It's just something that is unspoken but shown really, really well, which speaks to the idea that perhaps this change has been going on gradually, and it has been going on for a while now. And I think it's superb. And, you know, like I said, because this series has become more of an anthology show, we don't get to see a lot of our 4 main characters, but what we do see of them is really telling for the most part, and I think that's very much the case for Ern. Now, whilst Ern is definitely thriving when it comes to being Paperboy's manager, there is a little bit of uncertainty when it comes to the friendship side of things, the more personal side of things. We'll talk about it more when we get into Alfred, to be fair, but, you know, whilst I do think he's doing a great job by Paperboy, there's definitely a difference between that and his relationship with Alfred specifically. Also, the flip side of Ern's story arc or storyline this season is his relationship with Van. Van is a very interesting, elusive character for season 3 of Atlanta. We'll get into her in a moment, but when it comes to Ern's role in this story, he still feels very protective of her. He is aware of the changes in her personality, in her behaviors. She's not acting quite right, and he's noticed this, and he doesn't even know how she's in Europe to begin with. Like, he doesn't know how she got there. I mean, it would have been an incredibly expensive trip. Obviously, their trip is funded by Paperboy because he's on tour, but, you know, what's Van doing there? It doesn't seem like she was invited, and so he's trying to get answers, and he's trying to understand, you know, what she's doing and see if she's okay, because she seems a little bit off. And I do feel like there is this kind of underlying issue of him being perhaps overprotective and a little bit controlling, even perhaps because of his experience of managing Paperboy. He feels like he needs to also manage Van to some extent. I don't know, there was a suggestion that perhaps he was overdoing it and overstepping, but to be fair, because of their history and also because of the fact that they do have a child together, his concern is kind of justified. Especially when we get into Van's actual story and the finale and how that's all resolved. He was very much justified in being a little bit afraid and worried for her. So the next character up we have is Alfred, aka Paperboy, and I would say of the big 4, he was the character that really stood out the most. You know, his character arc and storyline was the juiciest. It was one that we could really sink our teeth into. So first of all, you have the Paperboy side of Alfred. That seems to be the side that is taking precedence at the moment. You know, this is the facet that he is showing up in most of the time in this season, because he's been met by fans, he's been met by producers, stage managers, promoters. He is in his full Paperboy game, and, you know, his notoriety, you know, his fame has traveled across the pond, and now he even has European fans that are excited to see him show up on this tour. And through this lens, you get to see, you know, what it's like for musicians to go on tour, especially if you're a rapper, especially if you're a black rapper in a white majority country. And you do see him kind of have to deal with the cultural differences in a lot of these European countries and cities. And it's something that I really appreciated, because the black European experience is seldom been represented in America. So seeing a show like this delve into some of the more uncomfortable kind of traditions, like the one in the Netherlands where everyone's walking around in blackface, like literally literally everyone casually walking around in blackface, like okay. I just think it was really clever, and it was really cool being able to see all of this through Paperboy's perspective. There was also very much a performative aspect as well. People around him just constantly asking him to be Paperboy. You know, you had these fans stopping him, asking him for selfies, asking him to have this persona on 24/7. And I think that's something that Alfred clearly, you know, sometimes benefits from. Obviously, you can see the money is up. The money is up. The promotions are up. Okay, the sponsorships are up, especially when he sells his soul to that fashion brand that had like a racist controversy or whatever. You know, so the money is up. You know, he's asking for free clothes. He has that power now. But at the same time, you also see the flip side of things where he's starting to lose his identity a little bit. And also in the episode Cancer Attack, you find out that he hasn't written a new song in ages, in like over a year, I think it is. So that kind of explains why he has that kind of looming sense of doubt to him. You know, he never really feels wholly happy, even though he has achieved all that fame and fortune. And when you find that out in that episode, you're like, oh, okay, I see. Like, he's lost inspiration. He's no longer in touch with his roots. He's kind of floating in this kind of bubble of fame and fortune, and he hasn't really been able to create in that environment. And so losing his phone in that episode was actually kind of a big deal. It was a big deal, because that was the last time that he had that spark of inspiration, and now it's just lost in the ether because of that guy's socks. We'll talk about Cancer Attack later on. So yeah, I think Paperboy's storyline is excellent this season. You see how far he's come, you see how much richer, how much more famous he's become, but at the same time, that's not wholly fulfilling to him. There's something still missing there. I think Brian Tyree Henry does a great job of conveying that, you know, in the character, that kind of dissatisfaction. But then on the flip side of things, you have Alfred, you have the person beneath the mask, and he also is having a rough time of it, because not only is there the whole Paperboy persona that he has to worry about, and the fact that he's no longer inspired and hasn't written anything in ages, but then you also have his personal circle that's being called in question, and that's particularly highlighted in New Jazz, you know, the New Jazz episode, where you see him start to kind of question the people around him. He's looking at Darius like, why is Darius always expecting me to pay for everything? He's looking at Ern like, is Ern really there for me? Like, does he really have my back? Like, who owns my masters? You know, he's asking all of these questions about the people who he basically came up with, the people who have been there all along, and he's starting to see how their behavior has changed as he's gotten richer and more famous. So in terms of this character's journey overall, like taking a look back all the way back into season 1, I think what may happen in season 4, because season 4 apparently will be the final season of Atlanta. Boo! Boo! Okay, well, the suffering never ends. Anyways, season 4 might be the last season, so I think what will happen is that hopefully Alfred will return to Atlanta, maybe get in touch with his roots a little bit more, and figure out, you know, the inspiration that he needs in order to push forward as Paperboy. Maybe start creating different kinds of music or different kinds of art, whatever it may be, but he needs to get back in touch with his real self and not be as distracted by all of this material stuff anymore. Because this season, like, all we saw him do was obviously perform his biggest hits, but also doing all of these promos, covering the backs of these, you know, billion-dollar fashion companies after they've messed up. And we also saw him attend this billionaire's party in London, where he was just there as a prop, basically, much like many of the other party goers. So it's like he's not doing anything of substance anymore, and I feel like that's another reason why he may have gotten out of touch with his music and with his inspiration to create, because he's been distracted by all of this stuff, which has been set up by Ern. You know, Ern is doing a good job as a manager to generate money, to generate profit for him as an artist, but in terms of the creative side, he's really suffered for it. So hopefully in season 4 we'll see him rediscover it, or maybe even just drop the whole thing, you know, retire Paperboy overall and just go in a different direction in his life. And going back to Ern for a second here, because I forgot to mention what I think his trajectory will be, I think it's tough to say. I think he's a little bit more flexible as a character. You know, he could go either way. But I do think that, you know, should Paperboy, you know, stop being a thing, should Alfred retire the persona, that Ern, because of all of the skills and the business sense that he now has, could just jump to another artist, honestly. I think he could become like a really prolific music manager because of just how great he's been doing career-wise. But that could also create irreparable damage to his relationship with Alfred as his friend and his cousin, I believe. Okay, so the next character up that we have is Van. Now, Van, like I said, was a very elusive character this season. For the longest time, we didn't even know why sis was in Europe. We didn't even know why she kept popping up. Like, she was doing the most random things, behaving completely out of character, especially in The Old Man and the Tree, where she pushes these two people into the swimming pool for no apparent reason. So we were really confused about Van, and we obviously saw Ern be really concerned about her and worried about her, constantly texting her, constantly trying to see what was going on. You know, people kept mentioning, you know, what do your parents think about this? Especially Candace in the final episode. You know, what do your parents think? What would they say? What's going on with you? And then it's only in the finale of season 3, which I think was an interesting choice. We'll talk about it when we get into the episodes, but it's only in the finale that we finally get to see Van's story for this season. And I thought it was a bit of a mix. I understand what they were going for. I think Zazie Beetz was amazing as usual as this character, and just seeing how, you know, Van is at a low point at this moment. She went to Europe kind of like on a whim because she had reached a really low point in her life. She had to take Lottie, her daughter, with Ern to her parents so that they could take care of her for a little bit, because she was at risk of hurting herself, you know, where she was driving that car and she just closed her eyes and didn't even know what she was doing at that point. It reminded me of Moon Knight. It reminded me of several sequences in Moon Knight. But anyways, she ends up in Europe because she needs to get away from it all, because she needs to rediscover herself. She feels like she doesn't know who she is, and I feel like quite a few characters on this show are experiencing the same thing, notably Alfred. It makes sense then, you know, when you see her popping up in the previous episodes and it feels like she doesn't really know what she's doing, it feels like she doesn't really have a plan. It makes sense, you know, why it is that she seems so lost, and it's because she is. She's experiencing a lot of self-doubt and a lot of questions are being raised in her mind, and so she's trying to get away from it all. But then in the final episode, that kind of amounts to a complete shift in the character. She becomes literally unrecognizable. She becomes Amelie. She tries her hat at being Amelie, even changing her hairstyle to resemble that of Amelie herself, and it all goes terribly wrong. It all goes terribly wrong, okay? And like I said, Zazie Beetz is incredible from start to finish, but you know, this woman, poor Van, she has changed her accent, she has changed her, you know, boyfriend or her partner, she has changed her career, she's changed everything about herself in an attempt to create this brand new life. And she really was deluded. Like, she really was in this delusion that she could just pretend like everything is going to work out. You know, her friend Candace asks her, how are you even going to stay here? What if your visa runs out? She's like, oh, like my boyfriend's going to marry me. Like, he's going to marry me. Everything's going to be okay. And then Candace brings up Lottie. She brings up her daughter. And I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming because either Lottie would have been the first question or the last. So I knew it was coming. And Candace is like, what about Lottie? And that's what breaks Van out of that spell, out of that delusion, is when she's like, what about my daughter? How could I have done this? I feel terrible. I feel like a terrible mother. I ran off to Europe on a whim and I left my daughter behind, and I have no real plan as to how to incorporate her in this new life that I've created for myself. So she starts to spiral, and that's when she reveals everything to Candace. So yeah, I do think it was a really touching moment just thematically for this character, because for the longest time, Van was the one who had it together. I mean, she didn't really have it together, but you know, mentally speaking, she seemed stronger, she seemed more resilient and stable, and Ern was the one who was like wobbly, wishy-washy, unreliable, deadbeat dad, all of that. But this time around in this season, we see Ern getting on with his job. He's really coming to his own as Paperboy's manager, really thriving in this space. And then you see Van just reach this low point in her life where she's questioning everything, and it's just led her to try and escape from being Van, you know, being this person that she has been her whole life, into creating a whole new character that she can inhabit. But obviously that isn't sustainable. And honestly, I really liked that change, because even though it was crazy and kooky as the series is often, I do think it was nice to see a change from the typical kind of strong black woman trope, because we oftentimes see, you know, the single parent, the single black female parent be strong and tough, and she knows what she's doing. She always has a plan. She always knows what to do in the toughest times, and she's the one to hold it down when perhaps the father, the man, isn't really stepping up the way that he should do. And we saw Van do this in previous seasons, like I said, but this time around she's broken. This time around she's reached a tipping point, and it's really nice to be able to see a character be that vulnerable. Okay, so finally, when it comes to the big four, of course we have my guy Darius. Now, I continue to think that Darius is underused. Okay, on this show. I'm so sorry, but I think Darius is he's worthy of more. I think Lakeith Stanfield is worthy of more. Okay, I think Lakeith is exceptional. Like, please, Oscar nominated Lakeith, yeah, please. The standout moment for me when it comes to Darius is, well, actually, first of all, the new Jazz episode is extraordinary, but that's mostly because of Alfred's role, to be fair. But Darius at the beginning there was also amazing because he's the reason why Alfred was led down this path. But also there was one episode, I can't even remember which episode it was. I think it was the white fashion episode, where Darius goes to this Nigerian restaurant, and of course it's a commentary on gentrification, right? But he goes to this Nigerian restaurant. It's authentic. Okay, he knows the owner. He has a great relationship with her. He loves the food. It feels like going home. All of that. Like, it's all good. And then you have this white woman. Oh yeah, it is the white fashion episode. You have this white woman who works for the fashion brand. She'd never heard of jollof rice in her life. Had never heard of jollof rice in her entire life, and she goes into this restaurant. She's like, they're onto something here. And what does she do? She and her partner buys out the restaurant and appropriates the culture and creates a whole van right outside of where the restaurant used to be, and they'd start to sell this like whitewashed version of Nigerian dishes, traditional Nigerian dishes, which of course were beautifully cooked and prepared by the restaurant owner beforehand, but now have just been commodified as products, okay, with a unique selling point. And they have like California versions and Mexican versions, just mixing up all of these different, you know, ethnic cultures, just mix it up until it turns into one big blob of beige and nothing. And it just upsets Darius, as it upsets me watching the screen. I was like, oh my god, I knew this was gonna happen. I knew it was gonna. As soon as she started asking questions, I was like, don't answer the questions, Darius. But yeah, that was really heartbreaking. That was one of the more, you know, powerful moments in that episode. It was really heartbreaking to see, especially through Darius's eyes, because he really loved going to that restaurant and exploring his Nigerian heritage through that food, that authentic food. But that was lost the second that white woman walked into the door. Other than that, when it comes to Darius, I think his main role is to kind of be, you know, one of those friends that kind of latches on to the famous person. The famous person in this case being Paperboy, you know, he's kind of leeching off of him. There is that scene in New Jazz at the beginning where Darius goes to buy his special psychedelic drugs, and the shop owner is like, oh, you're a little short on the money, and and he says something along the lines of like, fate has a funny way of dealing with things, you know, fate is on my side. And then of course, you know, after a beat, Alfred offers to pay for the drugs, and Darius is like, see, fate has worked again, or whatever. And it's hilarious, but at the same time it speaks to how he's kind of been leeching off of his friend, and and he's not cognizant of the fact that Alfred is starting to feel some type of way about that. Now it's time to rank the 10 episodes of season 3 of Atlanta. Like I said, because this is more of an anthology series, there are a lot of contained stories being told in these episodes, so I did think it was appropriate to do a ranking. So we are going to be starting off from worst to best. I will say though, overall I really enjoyed the show. I don't think there are any terrible episodes here at all. I think they were all good at the very least, but there were ones that were like special crack in there, you know. That was some good stuff, some good FX stuff, some good Donald Glover stuff in there, which I think do deserve a top spot on my ranking list. Okay, so starting off at number 10, we have Cancer Attack. Now this wasn't my favorite, I'm afraid. You know, like I said, still a good episode, great characters, you know, love everyone involved, but first of all, I just felt like the whole mystery around who had taken Paperboy or Alfred's phone wasn't enough to sustain the entire episode, and it only became clear why this was relevant and why he cared so much to begin with near the end of the episode. And that's when he gives that guy, that suspect, you know, a speech about how he hasn't been inspired to write any music lately. It's been a long time since he's written anything, and it's been a long time since he's felt creative. He's just been coasting off of his previous hits, but then there was this one moment where he did have that spark of creativity. He did record something, and it was on that phone, and he's afraid that if he loses that, then he also has lost his imagination and creativity and inspiration. So that was a really touching, profound moment that really elevated the whole episode and made the whole episode make sense. But it took us a while to get there, like, let's be real. It took us a while to get there, and the shenanigans were cute along the way, but I was like, okay, like, when is this going to become relevant? And also, I always thought it was Socks. I knew it was Socks who had taken the phone. Yep, yes I did. I knew. And the reason why I knew is because he was like shouting the loudest. Whenever someone is like shouting like, oh, I'm so annoyed that he took your phone, I was like, why are you so invested, Socks? Why are you so eager to point the finger elsewhere? Something tells me it was you, Socks. And of course it was. You know, this guy who was supposed to be the big defender of the blacks, of the Negroes in the previous episode, it turns out that he stole this man's phone. I knew it. And then in the end, he throws it away. So, like, what was the game here? Like, what was going on? We never really get a resolution to the problem of Socks. Socks sucks as a character, and he's meant to. But yeah, like I said, it takes a while for us to get there. Although I will say another highlight of Cancer Attack, oh my god, is when, you know, Paperboy does meet this kind of young child who is sick with cancer, and he's like on one of those Make-A-Wish programs, and he wants to meet his idol, Paperboy. And then when Alfred loses his phone later on, you know, one of the suspects is the sick kid, and he has to go up to the sick kid, and the sick kid is like, oh yeah, I'll do whatever it takes to help you, Paperboy. And he has to check if the child with cancer has his phone. Like, oh, that. So yeah, that was like a highlight in that episode. But then after that, it was like just waiting until the end when it got good. The next one up on my list is White Fashion. What can I say? Yeah, it's a case of yet another company messing up, you know, doing a boo-boo, saying something racist or doing something racist. We've seen it with the Gucci's and the Dolce Gabbanas and all of them. Like, you know, we've seen these scandals in real life, and this episode is kind of a commentary on that. Like I said, the plot point that really stood out to me was the one with Darius and his Nigerian restaurant and the cultural appropriation of it all. But in terms of, you know, Paperboy becoming a sellout basically, and, you know, taking the free merch and the money, all in exchange for giving this company a black pass, I guess is what he's supposed to be doing there. Yeah, I just think, again, it just speaks to how disconnected he's become from his roots. He's a sellout now, and it makes sense then in the next episode, I think it's the next episode, at least the one with him in New Jazz, where we see him enter a certain club. And then next up at number 8, we have Rich Wigger, Poor Wigger. This was a really interesting concept. guys. So this was like a big kind of standalone episode where we explore this like new character, and the episode is in black and white, so we're not aware of this character's race until, you know, early on in the episode, to be fair. But he is a mixed race kid. He is half white and half black, and he very much presents as white at the beginning of the episode. You know, we see him with all this kind of different media. He obviously loves rappers, but he obviously also loves, you know, aspects of like white culture. So he's kind of like in the middle, but at the same time he's saying the N-word with a hard R, like, my boy. My boy, what's going on there? So yeah, like, you just see him obviously kind of floating in between both. But when it comes to his friendship group, you know, when it comes to how he's presenting in school, he's definitely more in line with white culture, as it were. Until, of course, the fateful moment comes where, you know, this poor boy, he wants to go to college. His dad's not allowing him to apply for scholarships or like, you know, student loans, I think. I don't know why. I was really upset by that. His black dad was like, you're not going to apply for student loans. I was like, why on earth would he not apply for student loans? That made me really angry. Anyways, and then his dad was like, oh, it's going to cost you what, like 9 grand? And he was like, no, it's going to cost 40 grand a year. And he just laughed it off. That really pissed me off. Anyway, it's so unhelpful. And this poor kid just wants to go to college. And then they happen to have this assembly with this rich black man. You know, he comes into the school and he announces that he is going to be donating a ton of money, and he's going to be paying off all of the tuition fees for all of the students who are black. All of the black students. Already I was like, this is hilarious. Already I was on board, but then it gets even better because the blackness of it all isn't just categorized by skin color. No. That would be too simple. That wouldn't be Atlanta's game, okay? Instead, this guy is looking for particular characteristics. Like, you need to be black enough, not just in terms of how you appear and your phenotype, but the culture, how tapped in you are to the culture. I thought that was an ingenious plot point. Like, I thought that was so clever. So then you see the main character and he tries to like audition to get the funding, to get the tuition paid off, and he's answering all of these like dumb superficial questions that are tied into, you know, African American culture, and he unfortunately doesn't pass the test because they deem him to be too white, and so he ends up, you know, going home, getting angry, and then he plans to set fire to the school. Only to find that there is a fellow student, a black kid, who also plans to do the same. Except this time around, this black kid was deemed not black enough because he's a Nigerian immigrant. Oh, we hate to see it. Oh, we hate to see the diaspora wars yet again, guys. But yeah, we are touching on the diaspora wars here. The idea that certain people aren't classed as black enough because they're not African Americans specifically. And I think that was a great aspect of this conversation for this show to touch on, because I had been wondering, like, if you are an African immigrant, would you be considered as black enough? Because there is a difference in, you know, the cultures, you know, black cultures globally, and, you know, these questions that were asked by the judges didn't really address African culture, didn't really address Nigerian, Congolese, Ghanaian culture. It was mostly to do with American culture. So I did wonder, like, what's the deal then? And we get our answer, you know, it just doesn't count, I guess. And so the black kid is very much enraged and he wants to set fire to the building. And so a little chase ensues, and I think that was cute. Like, I think that was fun. And in the end, the black kid is deemed worthy of getting his school fees paid off because he is shot by the police. And as the guy says, you know, that is the blackest thing that can happen to you in America. So yeah, thematically speaking, I think the episode comes full circle. It definitely had some very interesting and intelligent commentary there, especially about mixed race people, mixed race kids, and the unique mixed race experience, as well as, you know, touching on the diaspora wars. But overall, I would say that this episode wasn't the strongest in terms of how it was constructed, and also the themes didn't really hit as hard as I think they could have. They were touched upon but not really explored in any depth. I don't think that this is going to go down as one of the most memorable episodes of of the series. The next one at number 7 is Tahar, I think is how it's pronounced. But this is the Zazie Beetz finale episode. I already kind of talked about my thoughts on it. And the only thing I wanted to add is that, you know, upon reading Stephanie Robinson's interview in IndieWire, I did see that the name of this episode, Tahar, or Tahare, or don't know how it's pronounced again, is named after a real life person who lived in the 18th century, who was known for eating just a ton of stuff. Like, he had an insatiable appetite, which is eating, and he actually lived a quite short life as well. But because of this like grotesque diet that he had, especially because he ate a ton of meat, he was said to be really smelly, and he was constantly eating food. And also some people took it another step further and suspected that he also ate human beings. Yes, it ties in, guys. Of course it does. It ties into what happens this episode, where we see Zazie Beetz working at this restaurant where they are serving le mets. They are serving le mets. They are serving le mets. Yes, there are whole cannibals eating around a dinner table, and one of them happens to be Alexander Skarsgård. Okay, so next one up at number 6 for me would be The Old Man and the Tree. Again, really fun episode. I especially love the fact that it was set in London, and the beginning where they're walking through the streets of London and they get to this dingy house, this dingy flat, and they walk in and this like white guy is showing them around, and they're like, what? This is where the party is? Like the billionaire's party? And then you see like the house is a facade. To be fair, Darius figured it out, but the house is a facade, and they actually get to the real house, which is still quite modest, I think, for a billionaire. But anyways, I guess it's central London. So they walk into the house, which has its own Nando's, and it's owned by this South African billionaire. And this episode actually touches on, obviously, you know, colonialism, and it touches on the fact that this billionaire is a descendant of one of the first, I think it was the first loaners in South Africa. So they loaned people money. So they were basically very wealthy white people in colonized South Africa, and they enforced, you know, a lot of these really racist institutions that existed in South Africa, and the remnants of which we can still see today, unfortunately. His family got rich off of colonialism, and he is still experiencing the wealth and benefits of that today. And we can see that in the real world as well. I mean, speaking of South African billionaires, why don't you look into Elon Musk's background? Anywho, and to be fair, Darius did have that like C storyline at the party where this woman said something that was a little bit unsavory, but he kind of brushed it off. And then Socks, this is why Socks is introduced. Socks comes in and makes a big deal about it, bullies the woman, sends her, you know, going home in tears. Like, it's a whole big thing, and it just speaks to how sometimes there are white people or allies who kind of co-opt the movement, who kind of don't even allow the people affected to speak, and just kind of whoop, suck all of the air out of the room. Okay, so the next episode in my ranking would be Sinterklaas is Coming to Town. That was just wild. That was a wild episode. It was the first episode where we actually saw the gang, you know, return for season 3, and we realized that they were going on tour in Europe, and we start off in the Netherlands. This is the episode that kind of spoke on these like European traditions that have different meanings in a modern day context, especially with the whole tradition of blackface. Like, that was a very striking image and just perfect. It was ripe for Atlanta to take advantage of, honestly. But yeah, I think it was a really great episode, especially to introduce us to our big four and where they're at in this season, and it really set up the themes of this season really well. Okay, so at number 4, the next one up we have is The Big Payback. Yup, listen, I can't believe they went there. I can't believe they went there. Not only did they go there, but they went there through the eyes, through the perspective of a white male character. That was interesting. That was very, very interesting. And I love the fact that it wasn't even like pro reparations. You know, it wasn't outwardly pro reparations. It showed the complications in this. You know, it showed how difficult it would be to navigate this as a society. It showed the positive positives and the negatives. It definitely came down to, you know, seeing the black perspective more, obviously. But even then, you know, even at the very end, it was very conflicting. So it didn't feel like it was outwardly pro reparations. But I do think that it delved into both sides of the argument really well, and it really explored what it would mean for there to be, you know, universal reparations required by law. Like, what would that actually look like if your ancestors were slave owners and all of a sudden you wake up, you have your house, you have your car, you have your job, and someone's banging on your door? Someone's banging on your door claiming that you owe her and her family members money. What would that actually look like? Like, that's kind of wild. And I think the fact that it did have a white character as its center made it feel like the episode really wanted to dive into both sides of the story, as opposed to presenting reparations as like an easy, quick fix all for all of the damages and all of the trauma caused by hundreds of years of slavery. Okay, so now we're getting into my top 3 episodes of Atlanta season 3, and at number 3 we have Trini to the Bone. Trini to the Bone is it. Trini to the Bone is a superb episode, and I have to say it has a lot to do with how adorable that little kid is. Oh my goodness, he is so cute. He was so adorable. Like, Trini to the Bone is about this, you know, really wealthy white family who have this, I think she's a nanny, and she takes care of their son. And at the beginning of the episode, it's established that his black nanny hasn't arrived yet to take care of him. And so his parents are trying to feed him some food, and it's their like bland, unseasoned food. And he's like, ugh. And then the dad gets like this, like, I think it's mango curry that the nanny prepared for him, and the mango curry is labeled as like light pepper. And he's eating it like, oh, it's so good. And the dad tries some and he's coughing his brains out, like he's like, this is way too spicy. But yeah, the kid has become accustomed to a different kind of culture, as we see throughout the episode. But then later on we find out that the reason why the nanny didn't arrive that morning is because she passed away. And this episode is all about navigating, you know, how to tell the little child this. Obviously they had a very, very close relationship. She was basically his mother because his mother works, and his father works as well, so he was actually a little bit more distant from his biological parents, but that nanny was with him all the time, to the point where she was the one to show up for his, you know, parents' photo day. It's just this really touching story about how this kid had that special mother-son connection with his nanny, and also how he became so familiar with a whole new culture because his nanny was from Trinidad and Tobago, and she would often share parts of her culture with him. So I loved this story. I love this story so much. I love the little kid. He's adorable as hell. And when he was in the church and he was like saying amen, amen, hallelujah, I was like, oh my goodness. But yeah, from start to finish, this episode was mwah. It was superb. It was brilliant. And then of course it wouldn't be Atlanta without some extra social commentary in there, because when they go to the funeral for this woman, you do also see her biological children in attendance, and they have some qualms. They're actually upset about the fact that she was a nanny to so many children and she didn't get a chance to actually spend a lot of time with her biological children. So we get to see two sides of this story. Okay, so next one at number 2 we have New Jazz. I think New Jazz was a superb episode, especially because it was so crucial when it came to understanding Alfred as a person and the doubts and insecurities that he's experiencing at that moment. But also, of course, like we need to we need to talk about the Liam Neeson of it all. Okay, so Liam Neeson showing up in this show, my first reaction was like, what's he doing here? Isn't he cancelled? That was literally my first reaction. Now, here's the thing about Liam Neeson's cancellation. It was kind of like incomplete. Like, it was kind of like, there was that moment where everyone was like, oh, what? Like, is that like real? Like, did that actually happen? And then it kind of faded into the abyss. So it didn't really stick. And the fact that this episode touched on all of this, like literally, as I was watching him on screen, that's where my mind was going. I was like, oh yeah, he was cancelled, but then he wasn't really cancelled. But then, and then he verbalizes this. Like he verbalizes it. Like, first of all, it's quickly established that it is him playing Liam Neeson. Like, he is himself here. He is himself here. And then I'm like, okay, are they going to ignore the controversy? But it doesn't seem like something Atlanta would do. They don't ignore it. When I tell you my brain was just like 100 miles an hour trying to figure out what I'm watching, they do not ignore the controversy. They address it head on, and honestly, there's not even a resolution. Like, honestly, Liam Neeson learned nothing. He learned nothing. He learned nothing because he didn't have to learn anything, and because, as he points out, when you're white, like, you don't necessarily have to be learning those lessons. So I just think that was a very interesting cameo. And another element of New Jazz that blew my mind was that, like, the cyclical nature of it, because at the beginning of the episode we see Darius and Alfred go on this adventure trying to find that special drug that Darius has heard about and has experienced once before. And as they're on their way to the store, they see this guy. They see the guy with the goofy hat, and they just assume it's another tourist who tried the drug and, you know, he didn't have a fun time with it. You know, he should have taken it easy. But then later on we realize that it was Alfred. I don't know how that works. Again, Atlanta is surreal. It's experimental. Not everything makes sense. Remember the invisible car? Not everything makes sense. But I thought that was so clever, guys. Like, I don't know if I'm easy to please or whatever, but I just thought that was so clever. And also the woman that he meets in that, like, museum or gallery, I believe that was his mother, right? Like, I believe that was a kind of manifestation of his mother. And, you know, he may have been high on these drugs or whatever, but he was seeing or speaking to a younger version of his mother who may have been involved with a lot of men previously. And that's why her so-called friends, like, ask if they're sleeping together. But he's like, no. I think that's why he's just so appalled at that discussion, because it's his mum and he subconsciously knows that. And yeah, she takes him to the cancel club because he's cancelled because he sold his soul to that fashion brand for free clothes. And also she's the one who raises these kind of doubts and questions that he has within himself about the friends, about the company that he's keeping, asking him if he owns the masters to his music. And that's what he asks Ern later on, and Ern confirms that he does. I wonder if Ern was telling the truth, because that seemed like a little bit of a half-hearted answer. It seemed like maybe he didn't know, but I'm guessing he is telling the truth, and that Alfred does own the masters to his music. But yeah, that episode was divine. And then finally, I would say my favorite episode of Atlanta season 3 would have to be 3 Slaps. Now, I've spoken for ages and ages at this point, so I'm not going to dive into the episode in too much depth, but this is yet another bottle episode where we saw this young black kid get slapped in school by his grandfather after he was misbehaving, getting all excited about seeing Black Panther 2. So he gets 3 slaps in the presence of his teacher, or like the counselor or someone, who ends up alerting social services. And unfortunately, his mum is so offended and angry by the fact that, you know, she suspects he was the one that called social services, that she sends him off, and he gets fostered or adopted by this young white lesbian couple, and like chaos ensues, madness ensues. Like, it's an episode of Get Out. It's an episode of Get Out. I don't know what to tell you. Like, this episode was just gut-wrenching to me. I was so angry. I was angry at everyone involved. I was angry at the mum for sending him to social services. Like, I understand she's upset, blah blah blah, but like, that to me just pissed me off so much. Like, really? Like, why would you send your son out to I was angry at the teacher, for sure. The little slap. And that's the thing here. The episode's called 3 Slaps. The slaps that the grandfather gave to his grandson were literally like taps. Like, I've slapped myself harder trying to apply blush. Like, it literally wasn't even that deep. But of course, because the teacher saw it, she's like, oh, it's abuse or whatever. So she reports it to social services, and he ends up getting sent away and literally fighting for his life. It was an episode of Get Out. Yeah, it was terrible. I don't even know what to say. Like, seeing those children in that position, I was ready to fight. I was absolutely not. And then it gets worse because you have that support worker or social worker who comes in to visit the house. Everyone else dismisses it. All the white people dismiss it. They believe the lesbian couple, but then the black support worker comes to the house and she sees two seconds. She sees there's no towel. She sees there's no washcloth, and she's like, hang on, something's going on here. But unfortunately, she ends up getting killed. Oh my goodness. She ends up getting killed by one of the foster parents. I think she's the one who was in Lovecraft Country as well. Oh, I should have known. She's in Lovecraft Country as well. But yeah, like, it was just a heartbreaking episode. And it just went downhill from there. Like, it got even worse. And then, just when you think you've had enough, like, just when you think your heart has been torn out from your chest already and you have nothing else to give, you find out that this is based off of a true story. Oh my goodness, I hate this world. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, I hate this world. But with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Atlanta season 3 overall an 8.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Oh, this was long. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Atlanta season 3, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this season down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.